Okay, hi, this is a video demo of my CLI data gem app for the first project for the Flatiron School curriculum. Um, I'm going to give a little bit of a sort of backstory or sort of summary explanation of that, but I am going to load it very quickly just because, and I'll explain why this is the case. It's a little frustrating, but it does have a little bit of a longer sort of load time than I'd hoped because of how it has to go about scraping all the information I need up front. So I'm just going to go ahead and load it now, and then I'll give some explanation. But basically, I can start with why it takes a little longer. I'd found the database that I'm working with online, the API that I found, is the only API I could find that has access to a sort of huge database of cocktails and sort of alcoholic beverages. And unfortunately, what I had hoped to find was that the database had just like a sort of huge main component that had the names of all the drinks and all the ingredients of the drinks, their mixing instructions, that sort of thing. But unfortunately, that what I wanted was really split up into two sort of subsections of this API. So I could find a searchable list of all the drinks with their IDs within the database and their names, and then I could find if you had the ID for a drink, you could go to a specific you could use that in pulling up a different section of this API that just had the details of that drink. Unfortunately, what that meant is for the purposes of this app, where I needed just a huge sort of catalog of those things, if I wanted to get all the information up front rather than sort of constantly having to pull from it throughout the use of the app, that I would need to have a slightly longer load time. Obviously, the load time isn't too long. It really happened in the first, 20 seconds or so as I was talking. But the reason it even takes 20 seconds is it pulls all the IDs and then one by one goes and looks for those IDs. I sort of built an iterator to iterate through. First, I compile an array of those IDs, and then I built an iterator to go through one by one and have it pull for each of those IDs the information that I need. But with that said, the whole idea of this app, and it's sort of explained right here on the screen, is that we are to meet the basic specifications of this project, we have a sort of list view of items in this database that I've scraped and made available, but then you also can go in and get detailed information from each one, so you can sort of switch between a list view and a detailed view as you interface with this app. But I did have a little extra time, and the sort of app that I'd really be excited to develop in the future would be one where you have a little more interactivity, a little more sort of like game style interface, so that people can get excited about learning what drinks they maybe don't know about. Before I did this, as I was in college, I was paying my way through college by bartending, and I was really surprised by the number of people who wanted to go out and spend money at bars, but really had no idea what sort of drinks they did and did not like. So I figured it'd be a fun way to sort of cater to that market, and maybe as a result, people would be excited to play around with an app like this. So hopefully you've read this by now. We're going to go ahead and just dive on in. The first time a user arrives, actually really every time you open up the app, it asks you to take this quiz. In the future, maybe there'd be a way for you to for it to remember certain users, but at the moment, it's just the first time you come, it asks you to take this quiz, and then once you've taken the quiz is optional again, but there's sort of a larger main menu of options that comes up as well. We'll start by taking the quiz. So I had it select, of the sort of dozens and dozens and dozens of drinks in this database, I had it select a sort of classic few. I made just sort of a test array, and it selects based on it goes through the whole thing and selects based on if whether or not the drinks are in this little test array for this quiz. The idea is you go ahead and pick one you like. We'll say we like a Cosmopolitan. It then identifies the ingredients in a Cosmopolitan, and within this same sort of subsection test, it then pulls drinks that have similar ingredients, asks you if you might enjoy any of these. Let's say I enjoy Gimlet as well. I'll tell it that. It then has a little more information about the ingredients. It can sort of cross-reference between those two drinks what ingredients you like. And then if there's any drinks, again, within this smaller subsection that you don't like, or it tries to identify any drinks that you might not like within that small subsection by looking for drinks that have none of the ingredients really, or in certain cases, maybe just one of the ingredients of other drinks that you've mentioned. I did want to make sure that you'll see here that you can opt out of choosing a drink you don't like. I imagine that several people wouldn't want to say that they were against certain drinks, especially if they weren't quite sure what drinks they liked in the first place. We'll go ahead for now and we'll go ahead and say we don't like Manhattans. So with that, it then sort of opens up its the search method that I built for it. It opens up a sort of wider search, sort of like wider selection for what it's going to pick. So instead of just looking at those small sort of like group of 16, it instead takes the ingredients you liked, the ingredients you maybe didn't like, and uses those to find a drink that doesn't have many of the ingredients that you didn't like, does have ingredients that you do like, sorts those based on how many of those ingredients there are into different sort of scores of the search. And then, as you'll see, returns, I had this text sort of based on how far it had to look and what sort of score it got for that search. But then it returns the name of the drink. I can talk more about this in a second, but it returns about how the name is stored and how these ingredients are stored. But it returns the name of the drink, returns the ingredients there, and then lets you sort of go on to the further functionality of the app. And this is really where the project requirements of having a sort of list view and detail view come up. But you'll see now if you go to the first option here, see a list of your liked and recommended drinks, we can see the results we've already pulled. And of course, this list would grow if you took the quiz a few more times to sort of refine what you did and didn't like. But it shows a list of what you like, a list of what the quiz has recommended so far. And this functionality is available elsewhere in the app too. But you can really sort of hone in. Do you want to see the ingredients for those? Do you want to learn how to mix one of those? So we can say, let's say we want to learn how to mix a gimlet. I also did, I didn't build this part, I found it online, but for certain searching for names, I found a neat little gem called Fuzzy Search that has an algorithm built in to sort of guess at what you're typing. So if I had typed in gimlet, this Fuzzy Search, and it really is, I'm pretty impressed by it, is able to know that we meant gimlet. We didn't mean GIMLT. I didn't build that, full disclosure. But anyways, the app then is able to pull that drink, the name of it, is able to pull the ingredients of it, and as we said, we want to see the recipe for it, so it's able to pull this sort of recipe. And that recipe, I'm not writing that. That's actually part of the information I'm pulling from the API. Anyways, then it allows you to return to the main menu. The other sort of option besides seeing a list of liked and recommended drinks that you've gotten from the quiz, there's also this option here to sort of search the entire repertoire. Again, I'm using that sort of fuzzy search here. But the search allows you to search by the name of a different alcohol or ingredient that's in the drink. It allows you to search by name of the drink itself. And then I did build in a sort of filter algorithm based on how I understand sort of palettes of drinks, so that when I've pulled all the information and I'm building different drink objects within a class of drinks, I have it sort of go through a process as well of a sort of a filtering process. And if certain ingredients match certain criteria that I built in, then it takes an instance variable for each drink object that I set to palette, and it sets that palette equal to here we can actually go. We'll go to 3. Sets that palette equal to dry or sweet or creamy or bright, just basically to allow you to sort of identify a sort of category articulate a category of palette, and then have the app be able to sort of respond to that in a slightly dynamic way. So, if I say I want to try a creamy drink, it pulls up a list of all the creamy drinks within this, and then you can say, espresso martini, I'm interested in that. Then it goes in, it has sort of the same options that it had for the other list, the list of the liked and recommended drinks. You can see a recipe or ingredients. I also built in this feature that I probably want to make a little, Right now it's just built in here so you could pull a drink from this list. It's also available if you search for a drink by name, search for a drink by the alcohol or ingredient in there. Right now it's only available here when you're also deciding if you want to see the recipe or ingredients. Probably want to build it in so that you can also check for the recipe of something and then add that in if you like the recipe. But for now, we've already seen what the recipe sort of functionality looks like. So here we'll just go ahead and add it to the list. Let's say add. We've added the espresso martini to the list of liked drinks, and now if we go back to look at that list, we'll see that it's appearing up here as well. Obviously, there's a lot of little, basic code snippets to help format this to have the proper sort of Oxford comma. Elsewhere in the app, I have also built in tiny code snippets so that it's properly putting, an espresso martini and a gimlet, so it knows when to use a and switch between those two articles as well. Yeah, and then maybe the only other thing worth showing might be just what it looks like if you're taking quizzes several times again. So it always defaults to the same list of these sort of test cocktails that I identified because they're popular and well known, but also because this database is pretty big. It has a pretty huge number of really out there cocktails, and not only am I less familiar with them, even despite bartending for years, but I didn't want them to really confuse people when it came to sort of identifying the core components of their palate. So I'm sticking to this. The one thing I realized I would have to do with that is, because it's a smaller list, maybe someone has said in the past they've liked a drink, maybe they're taking the quiz again and they say they don't like the drink. What does it do to the sort of algorithm and the memory for each user object if it's storing that same information as liked drinks or disliked drinks? So I sort of decided to let it override. If they've said they disliked a drink, especially given that I've offered the user an option to opt out of disliking any drinks at all. As a result, if someone's gone out of their way to say they dislike a drink, I think I want that information to override the liked drinks information. So if I go in now, I think in the past I said that I didn't like Manhattans. If I go in now and I say that I like Manhattans, for the purpose of the quiz, it'll still ask this next question based on the ingredients of a Manhattan. But in terms of the memory for a user object and remembering what drinks, I keep it from, once you say you dislike a drink, I keep it from allowing you to incorporate that into your list of liked drinks, if only because there's just so many drinks to choose from. The good news is it will continue to choose drinks based on drinks you've liked if you haven't also disliked those drinks. And so I think that in the long run, it will be best for a user to, if I have to choose how not to mix those two pieces of information, it would be best for a user if it just kept remembering the disliked drinks and not overriding those disliked drinks with liked drinks. And I'd probably have to think a little bit more about if the user's adamant about doing that, and maybe building in a feature that makes that possible. But for now, I think it works out the best if I do it this way. So again, we can say maybe I like a pisco sour as well. And you'll see here it says, depending on your answers, I do have it so that it's possible that, given this small subsection of 16 drinks, it's possible that there might not be any drinks to ask you if you don't like, given all the ingredients you've identified as liking. I did build in a little flexibility there so that if you've identified liking more than 10 ingredients, for instance, I built it in so that there's a little more of these in order for these drinks to show up, there's a little more of has to meet more criteria than if you had said you liked fewer ingredients. I can explain that when I work through the code, but I thought that it was a good way to sort of make the code a little more robust so that if people had liked a million different ingredients, it was still able to offer them some help in this section. But anyways, we'll go ahead and say none this time. And you'll see that the app sort of continues to identify new drinks. It continues to respond to the input that users give it. And it continues to then remember those drinks and offer options for exploring them in more detail, learning how to make them, learning how to, seeing what the ingredients are in them. And yeah, that's a brief overview of the app. And I'm thinking that for the purpose of this video, I probably won't dive in too much to the code, but really I split it up into sort of three things. I have a sort of CLI class that I'm really just calling some class methods within. There's no instance of a CLI, just a sort of class of the CLI that I'm calling methods on. Then I have a class of drinks that I am instantiating a bunch of objects. I'm having the app pull all this information from in my drink API class. When I run the app, I make a new object, initialize a new thing here, and I'm having the app remember all of this information by storing all of the information in a bunch of drink objects that are then collected within this sort of larger class variable of all. And then I also have user objects that I'm building here for each person who's using this, that then remembers that a user has many drinks. It has a dynamic relationship with that. A user has many drinks. Drinks belong to users ultimately by way of the CLI app here, or sorry, by way of the sort of CLI class methods here that are running as you're interfacing with the app. And I do think that as I made the app a little more robust, I had started to add these features about palettes. And given the way that you can sort of retake the quiz over and over, those were only sort of recent additions to this. Originally, the quiz was a one-time thing. I didn't have the palettes in here. But as I play around with it more, I really do think they deserve their own objects within the program. I think there should really be separate files that instantiate palettes so that a palette almost as a genre, like if you had a music app and there'd be different genres. I think a palette should operate similarly so that a palette has many drinks. In addition to drinks belonging to users, drinks would belong to palettes as well. I think too with the quizzes that I'd like quizzes to be objects. I think maybe there'd be some virtues to building quizzes so they were objects under themselves as well. But for now, I've left it as it is. And I think it works well. I think there's no bugs so far as I can tell. It offers a lot of functionality and really offers you a sort of ability to switch between interfacing with all these drinks in a list view dynamic and then seeing more details up close and then sort of playing around with those details. But hope you've enjoyed the app, and thanks for stopping by.